Hello and welcome to this review on Lucky Luke Western Fever for the PS1. Now, some of you might be wondering why I'm taking a look at such an obscure game like this, and the answer to that question is basically, why not? But the other answer is that, to be honest, I reviewed the original Lucky Luke game on PS1 quite a while ago, and at the end of that video, I said this. So, join me next time in this mini Lucky Luke PS1 marathon. We'll be taking a look at the second and last game released on the system. Well, next time ended up being almost 2 years later, but I think we're finally ready to tackle this game. It was released on both the PS1 and PC, but for this video we're sticking to our roots and playing the PS1 version. First off, if you want to know what Lucky Luke is, you should watch my first video on the subject because I don't want to repeat myself too much here. I wouldn't blame you if you don't watch the whole thing though, because it's 38 minutes long. Who makes a 38-minute video on such an obscure European-only PS1 game, for God's sake? Anyway, the first PS1 game was primarily a 2.5D platformer with shoot-'em-up elements, and while it starts off well with lots of interesting ideas, it pretty quickly falls apart, introducing way too many gimmick levels that aren't fun, and making the standard level design turn more maze-like and annoying. With Lucky Luke Western Fever though, that entire gameplay style is dropped, and here we find ourselves in a fully 3D world with these shooting gallery sections. Before we get into all of that though, how does the game begin? Well, it starts with a cutscene showing Luke travelling the desert on his horse and then receiving a letter from an unknown source which simply says SOS. Luke jumps into action and rides off to find the person who sent the letter. The first mission then begins with an initial cutscene and, oh my god, the horse can talk.
Aha! Rin Tin Can must have picked up a scent. You know, I really don't know why you wanted to bring that freak of nature with you. I hope he'll be useful for something.
I'm pretty certain that the horse didn't talk in the first game, so this really caught me off guard. No doubt he talks all the time in the comics and the cartoon, but I've never read or watched those, so this was a bit weird. The game then begins and there's two things that pop out instantly. Firstly, the graphics are actually pretty good. Well, I guess more specifically, the visual design is good. The actual graphical quality is pretty bad, but it's one of those games that holds up fairly well because of the strong visual design rather than having high graphical fidelity. Plus there's actually quite a bit of variety with the visuals too, going from the desert to a town, to a haunted village, a Native American camp, a haunted boat, and a few other places too. The second thing that I noticed straight away was that this game uses tank controls. Now, while I don't think this is too much of a problem, it is a bit clunky, and I found myself getting stuck on walls fairly often, and it feels quite stiff navigating the levels. Also, this game is by no means an early release on the PS1 that can get away with clunkiness. This came out in 2001, the PS2 was already out when this game was released, so yeah, that's a bit unacceptable really. The game is separated into two gameplay styles, the first being the exploration where you walk around levels and find items to open up new paths and also find optional areas. These items can range from dynamite to blow up a hole in a wall, honey to get rid of an ant nest, and loads of other stuff. I actually really liked this. Finding a random item and then seeing how it's used to get past an obstacle was always quite fun and charming. Like here, how do you think we'll get past this tree?
How do we get rid of this tree? We'll have to burn it.
Yeah, that's right, we burn it, because that's the solution to everything. You don't just simply move the tree out of the way and walk past it, you burn it to the ground. Also, if you've got to do the dishes in the morning, you don't just wash them, you burn them. If you've got a leak coming through the ceiling and you don't know what to do, burn it. If you've got to answer the phone and you can't be bothered to get up, what's the solution? Burn it. Burn it all. In these exploration sections we also sometimes have to avoid a selection of obstacles with timing, like these moving barrels, this tumbleweed, these horses kicking the legs out, these snakes taking bites out of you, or these cactuses. The general objective is to get to the end of each level and defeat a boss, bringing them to justice, and then moving on to the next area to track down the next criminal. There is a side objective which is to defeat every single enemy in each level, and it turns out that there's always 1 or 2 hidden areas which you need to find by getting an item and then using that item to find the secret. For defeating every enemy in each level, you'll unlock several bonuses, which are a music player in the form of the saloon piano, a making of menu which consists of concept art of characters and environments that are shown in their unfinished state, and 2 other things called Coyote Chase and Gallery, but I didn't unlock these because in those levels I didn't realise there were secret areas, so I missed stuff. I have to say it is pretty cool that for getting 100% in every level you unlock a new bonus though. A lot of these styles of games pretty much don't incentivise going for 100% at all, so to get something for finishing each individual level is pretty good. In terms of that style of gameplay, that's kind of it. There's no platforming, no proper puzzles, and the whole thing kind of just feels a little bit shallow. But we do have the second form of gameplay to talk about, and maybe that'll liven things up a bit. The other type of gameplay is the combat sequences. Now the best way to explain this would be to say it's like if you were playing a light gun game but without a light gun and just moving a cursor around with a normal controller. Only instead of freely moving the cursor wherever you want, it snaps to set positions on the screen where the enemies will appear. Also, unlike light gun games, it's from a third-person perspective, so it's also kinda like a shooting gallery game, like Wild Guns. Except you don't move your own character to dodge out of the way of stuff at the same time as moving the cursor. So it's a blend of light gun game and shooting gallery game, only more watered down than both of those things. Now this is particularly weird because the 2 games Western Fever is most similar to, these being Time Crisis, which it mimics with its cover mechanic, where to reload you need to take cover and then pop out of cover to take shots at the enemies, and Wild Guns, which it mimics with its third-person shooting style, both came out years before this, and yet this is much more basic and simplified. It feels like this should have come out first and been refined into those games, not the other way around. This gameplay might sound boring, but actually, despite me worrying at first that it would be really easy and uninteresting, they do manage to somewhat keep things engaging. They do this by introducing new enemy types which at first just shoot you a bit faster, but then there's some which throw objects at you instead of shooting, forcing you to keep your eye on another threat. And then there's enemies which can't be hit with direct shots, and rather you have to shoot a metallic object to ricochet the bullet off of to get around the defences. There's also a couple of other elements that come into play, like the fact that your cover will eventually begin to break if it takes too many hits, forcing you to play a little bit more aggressively. When all of these elements are combined, it actually does become fairly fast-paced and fun. That being said, more variety would have been great, and I personally would have liked things to become much faster and chaotic, but the game never really gets to a level of difficulty that I would say is in any way challenging. The reason for this is most likely due to the fact that this game is incredibly short, one of the shortest PS1 games I think I've ever played, only being around 2 hours to finish, and probably around 3 hours if you were going for 100%. Now on one hand this is good because it stops the gameplay from becoming boring, but on the other hand you feel like it's over before it did everything it could with its concepts. There are some other small details I've not mentioned, like how you can find clover collectibles in the exploration gameplay and then use them during combat, and depending on your environment it will have a different effect. Like sometimes it'll blow up a TNT crate, hurting all of the enemies, or sometimes it'll simply make all of the enemies dance, making them open for you to attack them. There's also a golden hat collectible, which increases your health by 1 point and fully heals you. But I mean, beyond that stuff, that's it. I've already talked about the entire game. I suppose there's the music, which is alright, it's nothing special at all though, and I find it weird how the boss fights don't have boss music, and even the standard level music gets reduced in volume, so they're a little bit awkward because of this. The boss fights themselves aren't really worth mentioning because they're so similar to the main combat sequences. I mean, they do have gimmicks like this guy who teleports around, and this boss where you need to shoot a metal object that's constantly switching places to hit them. But this is all just the same stuff that happens during the normal levels. The story is practically non-existent, it's just Luke stops the bad guys, nothing deeper than that happens, and the cutscenes can be charming, but again, because nothing really happens in them, they're really forgettable. Well, that is aside from this one cutscene that starts out like this.
Ugh, me Snakefoot! Thank you for freeing me, Paleface!
Wait, did that guy just swear?
Ugh, me Snakefoot!
He did, didn't he? Let's hear that again.
Ugh, me Snakefoot!
This is a naughty game, and I think we need to smack its bum. So yeah, would I recommend you play this? Well, no. There's literally no reason to play it. Just play something else and you'll have more fun. I really don't even know why I'm talking about this. This is probably the least I've ever had to say about any game that I've ever reviewed. I mean, it's not even bad, it's just painfully average. But even so, in my Lucky Luke series ranking, it is still above the original PS1 Lucky Luke game, because that was really frustrating towards the end. Whereas Western Fever was pretty consistent throughout. The only reason I can think of that you would want to play this is if you were a big fan of Lucky Luke and just wanted to see the world from that series in a game form. I kinda feel like this should have just been a full-on light gun game. Obviously it would have been very different, but I think it would have worked and been a much more fun experience. And this is weird because I mentioned elements of the original Lucky Luke game would have worked better as a light gun game, and now I'm saying the same thing here, but it's true. The game has positive elements like its unlockables are nice, the visual style is pretty appealing, the music is decent enough, and there is a fair amount of charm sprinkled in here. The combat is reasonably interesting too, and I even like how you have to use the items to inventively get past obstacles in the exploration gameplay as well. But everything outside of that is just so basic. It's far too simple, and because of that, there's literally no reason to play it over games like Wild Guns or Time Crisis. Those games have much more depth, much more challenge, and just are a lot more fun as a result. I feel like with Western Fever what they should have done is put more of an emphasis on the exploration elements, maybe introduce elements of platforming to make it a little bit more varied, as well as fine-tune the shooting element as well, maybe make it so that you could freely move the cursor around in order to make it so that enemies could come at you from more surprising angles, and just make the game a little bit more engaging. So that's Lucky Luke Western Fever, the game that took almost 2 years for me to play. But at least I've now finished off this 2-part Lucky Luke series I was doing. The first game was interesting but heavily flawed, and the second game was much more consistent but also way too simple. So it's kind of turned out that the two games have the exact opposite problems to each other, which is kinda weird. Anyway, give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below letting me know if there's any other obscure PS1 games I could take a look at, and maybe subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this coming soon. And until next time, bye!